Scions of the fatherland, go forth. The day of glory has arrived. See it raised against us, tyranny's blood-drenched banner. Hear the bellowing in the countryside. Those feral soldiers parade about us to cut the throats of our sons, our wives. What do they want? That pack of slaves, those traitors, those kings of conspiracy, for whom these insidious fetters, these irons forged back when we sucked the wet nurse's teeth. For us, Frenchmen all, insult of insults, quel outrage. It's for us they dare to contemplate the resurrection of an outdated slavery. Tremble, tyrants. Tremble, you ages of treachery, you disgrace of humanity, tremble. Your schemes of parricide are bound at last for their just reward. Every man, woman, and child is conscripted, united against you. To arms, my citizens! That was my own translation of some verses from the Marseillaise. And trust me, I took some liberties with that translation. Let's stay in France. This is about one of the greatest singers of the 20th century. Nocturne for Edith Piaf. The accordionist, the gigolo, the pugilist surely knew. It all came down to the lights. The footlights that fawned over your delicious agony. The lust lights of Place Pigalle, the chaste lights of Sacré-Cœur. Mais non, it came down to the heart. How it fractures like a thrown vase, like a lover's airplane for which the sky has no further use. How in breaking it is more of a heart. More than a heart. Non, rien de rien, non, je ne regrette rien. We smoked a gauloise in your honor. We danced the apache in your name. How we envy you, Mademoiselle Gassion. You had no regrets. We do. Gassion was Edith Piaf's real name. Piaf was her stage name. And the French lines that I quoted are the opening lines of her signature song, No, je ne regrette rien, which is known in English as No Regrets, but the title translates as No, I Regret Nothing, which I like a lot better. Sounds more French. All right, let's hop down to Italy. This poem consists of existing text. It's made up of English subtitles from Fellini's Amarcord, which the first time I saw, I wasn't crazy about it. Now I consider it one of his best movies, maybe his best after La Dolce Vita. This is titled Un film de Federico Fellini, musica di Nino Rota, which means, of course, a Federico Fellini film, Nino Rota soundtrack. They say bread and work, but wouldn't bread and wine be better? Every time I was full of hope, but it never comes to anything. The mountains are all white. Let's go and see the snow on the sea. Everything's gone. People, trees, birds, wine. Those three poems are from my new collection, Europa Upon New York, Poems Not Poems. My previous collection is called Thrum, and it's a collection of poems, prose poems, and brief poetic essays on musical instruments, specifically chordophones, which are instruments whose sound is produced by the vibration of a string. Mandolin. You are the runt of the lute's litter. The parasitic twin excised from its half-pair belly. Sideshow dwarf to the guitarist trapeze artist and bass fiddle strongman. You ring with tarantellas and bluegrass. You plink, plink, plink for revelers sweating spider poison and parry with the banjo at Saturday night clog dances. You are limoncello and moonshine, the Apennines and Appalachians, Vivaldi's Concerto in G major, and Bill Monroe's Blue Moon of Kentucky. Banjo. Sired by Africans, in the popular mind an emblem of the white rural South, it crossed the color barrier before its creators. Great-great-great-grandchild of Mbanza, who knew the clatter of manacles and the stench of slave ships. String and drum centaur. The guitar was fathered by European conquerors. An index of illustrious Afro-American guitar players reads like a royal bloodline of vernacular music. Son House. Charlie Patton, Robert Johnson, Memphis Minnie, Leadbelly, Skip James, etc. An index of illustrious Afro-American banjo players reads thus. Etc. I was very happy when I wrote to Robert. I was very happy when he invited me to read here. I understand the nature of U Gallery and the artwork is to help people who've had traumatic brain injuries. I had a severe head injury in December 2008, and I have to be honest, I was unfamiliar with the term traumatic brain injury until I had one, and I never thought in terms of a concussion being a brain injury or a stroke being a brain injury. 2009 was a period of intense recovery for me, and I noticed that I was making references to my injury or related injuries in my writing. Memphis Minnie's Unmarked Grave. Lizzie Douglas sang, she did. She didn't train out of here on the Chickasaw caboose. No, a stroke robbed her nursing home pillow in 1973. A synonym for stroke is brain attack. When brain cells die during a stroke, abilities controlled by that area of the brain are lost. How a stroke patient is affected depends on where the stroke occurs in the brain and how much the brain is damaged. National Stroke Association. Lizzie was born in Louisiana and performed for Loose Change in a Memphis park before the microphone transferred her singing to 78 RPM records. They say she played guitar like a man, a metaphor for instrumental prowess in a patriarchal society. Her remains lie in a Baptist church cemetery in Mississippi, birthplace of Tennessee Williams. A headstone honored Tennessee Williams' grave right before his burial. She got hers 23 years after her death. She was a Negro, you know, courtesy of Bonnie Raitt. Thank you, Bonnie. My cousin and her husband are here. In 2008, the summer of 2008, I spent a weekend at their house in Vermont. And being from the New York area, I saw something up there that I hadn't seen in years. Stars. Due north. Above New York, New York. The stars cower from our bullying urban illuminations. The elbow in the ribs, neons and fluorescents, raucous and ornery like a blast of Ramones guitar chords, as if we are telling them, get lost, go back to your dairy farm sky, we know how to make our own night shine. Above Wilmington, Vermont. The clouds wander like trills from a hand-carved flute. The Big Dipper is clear, fine, immense, as welcome and reaching as the sky's embrace. I am still here, it seems to be saying, I have been watching you. In January, a poetry instructor in Baltimore wrote to me to tell me he taught one of my poems in his class. And that made my week, carried over to the next week. This is the poem. Doxology. Be a cathedral for me, with vaulted ceilings that house the praise-misted air, and a canticle soul recumbent in the choir loft amid the solemnity of flute-throated boys. Be an unrepentant whore for me, a ragged baggage whose bloated thighs crackle with disease, who says, this is my body, this is my blood, as the fleas rouse themselves to feast. Be a harp of David for me, with prayer-plated strings tempered in the heat of the first breath, which brought waves to oceans and orbits to moons. Be a creature of hell for me, a baying goat-footed thing, viper-tailed and salmon-scaled, whose pustulant tongue froths with the renunciation of grace. Be a paraclete for me, a Christ-eyed mercy-bearer, and plead my case in dove tones before an eternity-sent jury that counts my wrongdoings, sin by measured sin, upon an abacus of gallstones. I live in Fort Lee, and right outside my door is the George Washington Bridge, which is where Tyler Clementi jumped. So he basically killed himself in my neighborhood. For Tyler Clementi, dead by choice at 18. You ended your life steps away from where I live mine, where I cross from one part of my life to the next, to a city where so many lives bump into, barge in on, and knock over each other, we throw our hands up and say there's no room for one more life. We march through our days in 3 dimensions. If you believe time is a dimension, we move in 4. You exchanged one for another, time for. You sought from depth, that depth obliged. When writing you sought from depth, I put down an error, you sought from death. The magnitude of the 3rd letter and the unexpected synonym. We built that bridge to bridge 2 horizontal points. The blueprints didn't intimate the 2nd connection. It joins vertical point to vertical point. It joined the Hudson River to your deceived and downhearted self. Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
I have copies of my new chapbook, You're Open Upon New York, and copies of my previous one, Thrum. They list for 12. I'm selling them for 30. I'm selling them for 10. I started off with La Marseillaise, which is the first poem in You're Open Upon New York. I am going to close with the final poem, Place. Whereas under the asphalt and cement in the many-throated subway there is nothing profound in 13 trains stalled between stations, and whereas what seemed blush became bruise, and whereas waves of smoke and urban ghosts, and whereas the Christ who watches over city has a film director's eyes, and whereas T. Jean, the Haitian cabbie, fingered his crucifix as he drove through the imperial shadow of St. Dominic's that grayed the street, and whereas he intoned Priez pour nous, and whereas city needs a new church, one whose bell is at our beck and call, we would say, ring bell, we want to hear your iron moan, and the bell would comply. And whereas we saw, or so we thought we saw, the Virgin Mary in her lustrous purity robed in blue along the river on the west side of town, and whereas she was only a psychiatric patient feeling infatuated with herself, and whereas a beggar woman on the A train at evening rush hour snapped, "Can you spare a quarter for something to eat, or something to drink, or a toothbrush, or some toothpaste, or is that too much to ask?" And whereas Kenneth Fearing inquired, "What has become of the faith that nothing could destroy?" And whereas we wish city were built of coriander, tamarind, mooncakes, basmati rice, papaya, provolone, tripe, semolina, hummus tahini. And whereas in spite of, therefore be it hereby resolved that city be a planet unto itself, and if not a planet, then a domain, and if not a domain, then a breath, and if not a breath, then a desire, and if not a desire, then go to God.